Hey guys, tonight we drift up a mountain made of marble and mist, where the clouds coil like lazy snakes around snowy peaks, and the air crackles with lightning that never quite strikes. You hear the soft shuffle of sandals across polished stone, and there she is, Hera, queen of the gods, staring down from her golden throne. Her eyes narrow, her lips pressed tight, and you just know someone, probably Zeus, is about to regret their evening choices. You step carefully because honestly, you probably won't survive this divine dinner party without at least one thunderbolt whizzing past your head. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know, where are you listening from and what time is it for you right now? Drop your location and local time down in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself walking slowly through Olympus, where the walls gleam with ivory columns, and every step echoes against floors that have been polished by centuries of divine egos. Hera sits at the center, wrapped in her flowing peplos, a crown glimmering with faint constellations. The air itself seems to bend around her presence, as if the wind dares not ruffle even one strand of her hair. She is the queen, but being queen here doesn't mean endless spa days or luxury sandals. It means watching every move of a husband who treats fidelity like an optional side quest. The mainstream fact is this: in Greek religion, Hera wasn't just Zeus's wife, she was worshipped widely as the goddess of marriage and family. People built massive temples in her honor, especially in Argos and Samos, hoping she'd bless their unions with stability. That's the public-facing PR image: nurturing, protective, queenly. But behind closed palace doors, you start to sense the tension. Because here's the quirky tidbit: the Greeks themselves didn't exactly idealize marriage. Ancient weddings could be closer to business contracts than love stories. And in those arrangements, Hera's endless jealousy almost felt relatable. After all, if your spouse wandered off disguised as a swan or a bull, or yes, this actually happened at Golden Shower, wouldn't you be suspicious every time he said he was working late? Historians still argue whether Hera's anger in myths was meant as comic relief, a warning about female power, or simply a narrative tool to explain why so many heroes had rough childhoods. But when you picture her tonight, sitting beneath the vaulted clouds, you realize she's carrying something heavier than petty jealousy. She's the embodiment of trying to keep order in a household where chaos is the daily special. You trudge across the marble floor, hearing faint thunder grumbling like an upset stomach overhead. Hera's eyes follow you, steady but not cruel. For a moment, you see the weight of centuries' prayers whispered into the night, sacrifices burned in her name, women asking for loyalty from husbands who probably couldn't even handle a toga without stains. And in that gaze, there's anger, yes, but also exhaustion. The kind you get when you've told the same person 1,000 times not to leave wet laurel wreaths on the couch. She adjusts her crown, and the peacock feathers embroidered in her robe shimmer, reminding you of her sacred bird. You think about how a peacock struts, tail flashing like a rainbow on steroids, and realize, of course, she picked that symbol. Regal, proud, maybe a little too showy but impossible to ignore. Just like Hera herself, a breeze drifts in through Olympus's open halls, carrying faint scents of roasted lamb from mortal offerings far below. You yawn, the smell surprisingly cozy, and think about how those offerings were supposed to earn divine favor. But with Hera, it wasn't always that simple. She could be kind to her worshippers, or she could be moody, depending on what fresh scandal Zeus had cooked up that week. Imagine trying to light a humble incense burner while hearing, through the grapevine, that the king of the gods had just turned into a swan for reasons no one wanted to explain. And so, as you settle into this journey, you realize that Hera's anger is less like a constant thunderstorm and more like a simmering stew, sometimes boiling over, sometimes just bubbling quietly. Either way, you can't ignore it. It perfumes the whole mythological kitchen. The marble beneath your feet grows cooler. The clouds outside drift slower, and you let the queen's story begin to unfold. Hera, always watching, always weary, always angry, and maybe, just maybe, All was right. You wander a little deeper into the shimmering halls of Olympus, and the marble starts to glow faintly, as if moonlight has seeped into the stone itself. Hera sits a little straighter on her throne now, her expression calm but sharp, the way someone looks when they're waiting for you to admit you've eaten the last slice of ambrosia cake. Tonight, the story turns to her marriage with Zeus, the so-called king of gods, wielder of thunderbolts and also, apparently, the least consistent husband in the cosmos. The mainstream historical fact here is that the marriage of Hera and Zeus was celebrated as one of the grandest unions in Greek mythology. Ancient poets described it like a cosmic event. The heavens themselves paused, nature bloomed, and all of creation seemed to cheer when the two came together. On paper, it was a celestial royal wedding. Mortals even reenacted it in festivals, acting out the divine honeymoon to honor Hera as the goddess of matrimony. And here's where the quirky tidbit rolls in. Mythology never quite let that romantic image stick. According to some versions, Zeus had to resort to trickery just to win Hera over. He disguised himself as a bedraggled cuckoo bird, shivering in a storm. Hera, feeling pity for the poor creature, held it close to her chest. Boom! Suddenly the bird transformed back into Zeus, grinning with lightning in his beard. And before she could throw him off Mount Olympus, he declared they were now destined for marriage. Picture it, the queen of the gods basically. Catfished by her own fiancé, historians still argue whether this myth is meant as a playful origin tale or a darker reflection on how ancient Greeks thought about consent and marriage. Was it light-hearted trickery, like a prank gone too far? Or does it reveal an uncomfortable truth about how power dynamics worked even among the gods? Either way, you can feel Hera's simmering frustration. Starting not long after the honeymoon vows were recited, you trudge down a corridor lined with statues, each depicting the wedding in impossibly idealized poses, Zeus smiling like he's never told a lie in his immortal life. Hera serene as though she isn't already calculating how often she'll need to check where he's sneaking off to. You pause at one sculpture, noticing the faint cracks in the marble, as if time itself wanted to add some honesty to the story. The wedding feast, at least according to the poets, was magnificent. Gods and goddesses filled the banquet hall, nymphs poured nectar, and the graces danced in flowing rhythm. You imagine the scene with modern eyes, golden cups raised, peacocks strutting like VIP guests, and Zeus looking smug as he claims the most enviable bride in the pantheon. Somewhere in the corner, though, you sense Hera's quiet calculation because she isn't just marrying a man. She's marrying a political office. To be queen of the gods means endless power, but also endless surveillance, endless gossip, endless disappointment. It's like stepping into a marriage where everyone else at the table has an opinion, and none of them are rooting for your happiness. You hear whispers echoing from the marble, Aphrodite giggling, Hermes cracking jokes, Poseidon loudly asking if anyone brought better wine. Hera, calm on the surface, presses her lips tighter. You know that feeling when you agree to something because you see no way out? That's the undertone humming through the immortal love story. You shift your gaze out the window. Below Olympus, mortals are celebrating too, reenacting the divine wedding in miniature. Bonfires crackle, villagers exchange garlands, and young couples hope that mimicking Zeus and Hera's bond will make their own unions last. The irony is heavy. Mortals begging for stability from a marriage. That mythology will soon turn into a cosmic soap opera. You walk past another mural, this one showing the cuckoo bird perched on Hera's hand. The detail is tender, almost sweet, but knowing the twist behind it, you can't help but smirk. Imagine modern dating apps if gods were involved. Swipe right on a mysterious bird. Swipe left on the thunder god pretending to be livestock. No wonder Hera developed a long fuse and an even longer memory. The air grows warmer. The torches flicker, and you hear faint thunder rumbling from Zeus's chambers. He's not angry, just restless, always restless. And Hera knows it. The seeds of her legendary anger are already planted, watered not by pettiness, but by the recognition that she's in for an eternity of storms. You sit down on a step near the throne, letting the marble cool your legs and close your eyes for a moment. Hera's presence looms above you, her crown gleaming like captured starlight. For all her fury, you sense she's not just the angry wife trope that storytellers love. She's also the protector of vows, the defender of loyalty. The queen trying to keep order while chaos constantly slips out the back door in the shape of a swan. You breathe slow, hearing the echo of her wedding song fade into the corridors, and realize the honeymoon glow may have blinded Olympus for a night, but the cracks in the story were already forming. You wander past the echoing banquet hall, where traces of laughter and harp music still float like ghostly perfume, and find yourself in a quieter chamber. Here, the air is cooler, tinged with the faint scent of olive oil and incense, and the walls are painted not with cheerful wedding scenes, but with stern portraits of Hera seated alone, a crown heavy on her head. You realize this is where the story shifts Hera as queen, but a queen without choice. The mainstream fact is simple. In Greek religion, Hera wasn't just Zeus's partner. She was central to the political theater of Olympus. Her role was symbolic, embodying the institution of marriage itself, which was the bedrock of Greek society. Just as cities needed order, households needed stability, and Hera's image reinforced that stability. She was the divine matron, the one brides prayed to, the guardian of unions. Her temples were among the grandest in Greece, especially the Herion near Argos, a massive sanctuary filled with columns that towered like frozen trees. But here's the quirky tidbit. The myths themselves often undercut that majestic role. Instead of serene dignity, Hera is portrayed in story after story as furious, scheming, or downright vindictive. It's almost as if the poets couldn't resist making her the eternal scold, the divine mother-in-law energy of Olympus. Imagine going down in history as both the goddess of marriage and the cautionary tale of why marriage drives you mad. Historians still argue whether these portrayals reflect misogyny in Greek culture, or whether Hera's sharpness was respected as a kind of cosmic justice. Was she unfairly maligned, or was her wrath understood as the natural counterweight to Zeus's recklessness? Either way, the tension is baked right into her crown. You trudge along the marble floor, each footstep echoing under the painted ceilings, and you picture Hera weighing her options at the start of her reign. She's seated on that throne not because she necessarily wanted it, but because Zeus maneuvered her there. The cuckoo trick had been the first sign. Her role as wife and queen was decided by someone else's power play, and once enthroned, there was no easy escape. Divorce wasn't exactly an option when your partner controlled the weather. You pause at a mosaic on the floor, Hera depicted as a cow, one of her sacred animals. To ancient Greeks, the cow symbolized patience, fertility, and quiet strength. But seeing her reduced to that symbol also stings here as a goddess forced into a role of nurture and endurance, even as she simmers with private frustration. You imagine Hera sighing in the silence of her chambers, the kind of sigh that rattles the peacock feathers on her cloak. Her marriage, despite its pomp, feels less like a love story and more like a chess match where only one side gets to move the pieces. Zeus dashes around Olympus, chasing whims, while Hera is left holding the crown, expected to keep dignity intact. It's like being the face of a brand whose CEO is constantly embroiled in scandals. Every thunderbolt fling of Zeus's reflects back on her. A torch crackles nearby, the smoke curling lazily upward, and you hear Hera's voice in the silence not spoken but felt. It says, *, this throne isn't freedom, it's obligation. *, and you think of how many ancient queens and consorts must have felt the same. From Babylonian empresses to Roman matrons, many were celebrated as symbols of stability. But rarely did they have true agency. Some myths even hint that Hera resisted Zeus at first, refusing his advances until tricked. If that's true, then her constant anger later isn't irrational jealousy, it's the slow burn of someone who never got to choose her own destiny. You lean against a column, tracing the carved ivy leaves, and let that thought settle. Hera's fury may not be about petty affairs, but about the deeper loss of control. A breeze slips in through the high windows, carrying with it faint sounds from the mortal world below, brides whispering prayers, families lighting candles, children playing in courtyards. To them, Hera is their protector, their divine sponsor of family life. They don't see the exhaustion etched into her immortal gaze. You almost laugh at the irony mortals asking a weary goddess for peace in their homes, when her own household is a never-ending battleground. The marble under your feet grows colder, the torchlight dimmer, and the silence stretches longer. Hera's throne, though magnificent, suddenly feels more like a gilded cage. She sits there, queen of everything, yet also captive to a role defined by her husband's choices. You let your eyes drift shut, and you almost hear the faint scrape of her crown against marble as she turns her head. Not rage, not vengeance, just a woman, divine or not, wondering if this is truly the life she would have chosen. The hall of portraits fades behind you, and the air grows noisier. Voices echo through Olympus, overlapping in a kind of eternal dinner party argument. You pass a doorway framed by golden vines and peek inside. There they are, the family of gods, sprawled across couches, sipping nectar like it's cheap wine, and bickering as though they've been trapped together for centuries, which, of course, they have. This is where the family feuds begin, and where Hera's patience stretches thin. The mainstream historical fact is that Greek mythology wasn't just about Zeus and Hera as a pair. It was about an entire divine family that mirrored human households. The Olympians argued, reconciled, betrayed and schemed, reflecting the way real Greek families functioned with drama at every turn. Ancient plays often depicted households as the center of conflict, and the gods were no exception. Here's the quirky tidbit in some versions of the myths. Family dinners on Olympus were described in almost comedic tones. Imagine your uncle starting a political rant at Thanksgiving, multiply that by immortality, and you've got a sense of it. One myth says that when Eris, goddess of strife, wasn't invited to a wedding feast, she crashed it anyway and threw the infamous golden apple into the crowd. Result? The Trojan War, basically. An uninvited relative with bad manners started a 10-year international conflict. Historians still argue whether these stories were meant as pure entertainment, or whether they served as satire, gentle reminders to Greeks that even gods couldn't manage a peaceful household. Was it a mirror held up to human dysfunction, or a cosmic exaggeration designed to make mortals feel better about their own squabbles? Either way, it's oddly comforting to know that even divine family reunions could devolve into chaos. You trudge further into the hall, where couches are scattered like battlefield trenches. Apollo is plucking a lyre, trying to drown out Ares' complaints about not getting enough credit in wars. Athena rolls her eyes, her helmet tucked under her arm, while Artemis keeps sighing, muttering about wanting to go back to the woods. Hermes lounges at the edge, whispering gossip like a teenager live texting the drama. And then there's Hera, seated rigidly, a golden cup untouched in her hand. She doesn't yell. Not yet. Instead, she watches every glance, every smirk, every whisper. It's the quiet fury of someone cataloging all the infractions for later. You know that feeling when you sit through a family gathering, smiling politely, while making a mental list of who owes you an apology? Hera perfected it long before humanity invented awkward reunions. Zeus, of course, lounges in the center, thunderbolt propped casually against the couch. He tells jokes that make half the gods groan and the other half fake laughter. Every so often, he disappears for errands, returning with suspiciously smug expressions. Hera's gaze sharpens each time, but she says nothing. Silence can be louder than any thunder. The arguments bubble up. Poseidon demands more temples by the sea. Demeter grumbles that no one respects agriculture. Dionysus stumbles in late with ivy in his hair, singing a drinking song slightly off-key. Hera's knuckles tighten on her cup, and you swear the peacock feathers embroidered on her cloak twitch in irritation. From where you stand, you notice how these feuds aren't just family spats, they shape the mortal world. When gods squabble, mortals pay. Storms, plagues, wars, all ripple effects of divine drama. Imagine being a farmer in ancient Greece, waking up to find your crops ruined, and realizing it's because some immortal cousin lost a board game in Olympus. The room grows louder, and you catch one of Hera's sighs long, controlled like a tea kettle just before boiling. Her anger isn't only at Zeus, though he's the prime culprit. It's also at the endless noise, the petty rivalries, the burden of keeping this dysfunctional immortal family in some semblance of order. She's the one who smooths over conflicts, who enforces boundaries, who plays referee in a game where no one ever stops arguing. You step back, the marble cool under your heels, and you imagine her in a monologue. Asterisk, they call me jealous. They call me vengeful, but who else is actually keeping this house together? Asterisk, you picture Hera standing up, slamming the golden cup down so hard it rings like a bell, and the hall finally falling silent. The torches flicker, shadows stretch across the bickering gods, and you realize that this is what eternity looks like, an endless divine family dinner, where the queen must always be angry, because no one else takes responsibility. You exhale slowly, the echoes fading into the halls behind you, and you step quietly onward, leaving the feuds to stew in their own thunderous silence. The hallway leads you to another chamber, this one decorated with frescoes that shimmer faintly in the torchlight. At first glance, they seem beautiful swans gliding on lakes, bulls charging through meadows, golden rain falling through the air. But look closer and you realize these aren't serene landscapes. They're crime scenes in paint. Every panel shows Zeus in one of his infamous disguises, chasing yet another mortal or nymph. This is where the story of Hera's anger deepens, because here the betrayals begin, casual as morning errands. The mainstream historical fact is that Zeus's affairs weren't just poetic exaggerations. In myth after myth, he fathered children with mortals, nymphs, and even goddesses. The Greeks used these stories to explain the origins of heroes like Perseus, Minos, and Heracles. Each city-state loved to trace its founding line back to Zeus. It was divine marketing. If your town's hero was the son of the sky god, suddenly you had cosmic street cred. But the quirky tidbit is this: Zeus rarely showed up in his own form. Instead, he approached lovers as animals, weather, or random objects. Swan? Check. Bull? Check. Golden shower? Yep. Disturbingly enough, once, he even turned into fire. It's as if he couldn't resist inventing new levels of supernatural cosplay, just to make things interesting. If Zeus lived in modern times, you can picture him showing up to a first date in a rented mascot costume and insisting it was romantic. Historians still argue whether these bizarre disguises were symbolic. Maybe the Greeks saw animals as representations of natural forces, or whether storytellers just enjoyed making audiences gasp. Was it allegory, or was it simply entertainment with a scandalous punchline? Either way, Hera was the one left dealing with the fallout. You trudge closer to the frescoes, noticing how Hera is always painted on the edges. Sometimes she's glaring from a cloud, sometimes holding a peacock feather tight in her fist, sometimes whispering to a servant about her next plan for revenge. The artists knew every fling carried consequences. Hera never forgot. Picture her seated on Olympus, cup of nectar untouched. As whispers floated through the halls, Zeus has gone down to earth again, this time as a swan. You can almost hear the collective sigh. Even the other gods rolled their eyes at this point. Hera, though, wasn't rolling hers, she was grinding her teeth. And who could blame her? Eternity with a husband whose hobbies include transforming into wildlife isn't exactly the dream marriage package. What made it worse was how casually Zeus brushed it off. You imagine him returning late to Olympus, feathers still clinging to his toga, whistling innocently as though Hera wouldn't notice. That kind of blatant disregard is enough to drive any partner mad. Hera's anger, then, isn't random jealousy, it's the slow, steady drip of disrespect, the kind that wears grooves into stone over centuries. The frescoes shimmer again, and you see Io, the mortal girl Zeus fancied. She's painted with wide eyes, innocence carved into her expression, while Zeus hovers in the form of a dark cloud. Hera isn't yet in this scene, but you know she will be soon. Her role, again and again, is not just as wife, but as enforcer of cosmic order. And when Zeus broke rules, Hera didn't just scold him, she punished whoever else got pulled into the mess. That's where her reputation takes a darker turn. Mortals whispered that Hera's wrath fell hardest on the women Zeus pursued, even though they were often unwilling. Was she cruel, or was she powerless to direct her fury at Zeus himself? The debate lingers like smoke in the air. You lean against the cold marble, considering how centuries of poets, mostly men, painted Hera as the nagging, vengeful wife. But beneath that stereotype lies something sharper, frustration with a system. Where even the queen of the gods couldn't hold her husband accountable, the torches flicker, the frescoes waver, and you can almost hear Hera's voice. Dry and cutting, asterisk, so this is marriage me holding the kingdom together. While he plays tourist in every village below dot asterisk, the sarcasm is thick enough to taste. You leave the chamber of painted betrayals, your footsteps echoing faintly, and the images linger in your mind. Swans, bulls, golden rain, it all blurs into one repeating theme. Zeus wanders, Hera fumes, and somewhere between them, the mortal world quakes under the consequences. You follow the echo of your own footsteps into another gallery, and here the walls no longer show swans or bulls, but a strange, almost comical scene. A young woman looks terrified, her body beginning to morph into a cow, while a looming cloud hovers nearby. You recognize the story. Io, the priestess of Hera, one of Zeus's many unfortunate entanglements. This is where jealousy takes physical form, turning a mortal's life into something absurd, awkward, and cruel. The mainstream historical fact is that Io wasn't just a random figure in myth. She was tied to actual cult practices in Argos. Inscriptions and temple dedications link her to Hera, suggesting that her myth may have grown out of older local traditions. The Argives treated Io as both a goddess in her own right and a mortal ancestor of powerful lineages. So, in a way, the myth served political as well as religious purposes, connecting divine stories with civic pride. But here's the quirky tidbit. Zeus's solution to hiding Io from Hera was to literally turn her into a cow. Not a glamorous animal, not even a rare one, just a plain old cow. Imagine being caught cheating and saying, "No, honey, this isn't another woman, this is livestock." It's the kind of cover story that wouldn't fool anyone at a family barbecue, let alone the goddess of marriage. Historians still argue whether Hera truly believed the disguise or simply played along to trap Zeus in his own lie. Some versions say she instantly saw through it and demanded the cow as a gift, which Zeus reluctantly handed over. Others suggest she pretended to buy the excuse, biding her time until she could tighten the noose. Either way, Hera ended up with Io grazing in her divine pasture under her watchful eyes. You step closer to the mural, and Io's painted eyes seem to plead with you across centuries. Imagine the terror of waking up one morning and finding hooves where your hands should be. Every chew of grass would feel like a humiliation. And worse, knowing that it wasn't even your fault, you just caught the attention of the wrong god at the wrong time. Hera, of course, didn't stop at ownership. She assigned Argus, the 100-eyed giant, to guard Io, a watchman who literally never blinked, because while some eyes slept, others stayed open. The image makes you chuckle nervously. It's like giving someone a 24/7 babysitter crossed with a security camera that never needs charging. Forget privacy. Io's every move was under surveillance. You imagine Hera sitting on Olympus, sipping nectar, satisfied that at least she controlled the situation now. Zeus, fuming, had to plot how to outwit Argus. Mortals and gods alike knew this was the eternal cycle. Zeus strays, Hera retaliates. Collateral damage piles up, and through it all, Hera's anger grows not mindless rage, but something more deliberate, almost administrative. She managed revenge like some people manage spreadsheets. The room seems colder as you think about it. Io wandering as a cow across fields, swatting flies with her tail, longing for her old body, while Argus follows with unblinking eyes. The myth is both tragic and absurd. A story told around fires to make audiences laugh at the ridiculousness, but also squirm at the cruelty. You lean against a column, running your hand across the cool stone, and wonder if Hera ever felt a pang of pity. After all, Io had once served as a priestess, whispering prayers into Hera's temple. Maybe the betrayal cut deeper because it involved someone from her own household. Or maybe pity was swallowed whole by the larger fury she carried. A fury directed less at Io herself than at the cosmic imbalance she had to endure. Above you, thunder rumbles faintly. Zeus is restless again, always restless, and Hera's eyes, carved in countless statues, seem to follow you with a mixture of weariness and ice. You step quietly out of the gallery, leaving behind the painted cow and the eternal stare of Argus, and realize you're only at the beginning of a long chain of Hera's anger. The next gallery yawns open like a cave, and you find yourself facing a colossal fresco of Argus himself. His body sprawls across the wall, eyes painted everywhere on his arms, his legs, even the back of his hands. Some are half closed in drowsy slumber, others wide awake and gleaming, as though they can actually see you. You shiver, realizing this wasn't just an artistic choice, but a reminder in Hera's world. Vigilance was weaponized. The story continues in hushed tones through the stone. Zeus, desperate to free Io, summoned Hermes, the messenger. Normally the cheerful bringer of news, Hermes now became an assassin. His task, to lull Argus into sleep, every last eye, and then to kill him. Imagine the awkwardness of being the god of trade, trickery, and music, suddenly told to pull off a divine murder. Here, the mainstream historical layer folds in. Scholars note that Argus may not have originally been one person, but a memory of ancient cult symbols, eyes painted on shields, pottery, or even animal hides to signify watchfulness. When the myth was retold, those symbolic eyes became literal, grafted onto a single body until he became a monster of vigilance. It's a neat example of how mythology stitches symbolism into narrative, turning abstract ideas into characters with tragic fates. But here's the oddball detail that makes you pause. After Hermes slew Argus, Hera didn't let those 100 eyes go to waste. She took them and set them into the feathers of her favorite bird, the peacock. That's why, according to the myth, peacocks shimmer with eyes on their tails. It's a revenge story turned fashion statement, proof that Hera knew how to recycle even her grief. It's almost modern, like upcycling heartbreak into haute couture. You picture the scene. Hermes playing his flute, weaving drowsiness into the air until every eye of Argus drooped. The giant slumped against a tree, still covered in staring orbs, and then one swift strike. Hera's most loyal servant gone. Imagine the silence after, broken only by Io's lowing. And somewhere on Olympus, Hera must have felt the sting of loss layered over betrayal. The irony deepens. Hera, furious with Zeus, took it out on Io, then hired Argus to guard her. When Zeus intervened, Hera lost Argus too. Every solution created a new wound. It's a cycle historians often call Hera's double punishment, the way she lashed out at mortals, but ended up injuring her own circle of power. You linger before the fresco, tracing the outlines of those painted eyes. They seem less menacing now, more mournful. Each one a fragment of Hera's vigilance, forever denied rest. No wonder she fixed them into a bird to strut and dazzle, to remind the world of what had been stolen from her. Even in ornament, Hera was documenting loss, and Io? Her torment wasn't over. Freed from Argus's watch, she wandered across the known world, still a cow, still haunted. Hera, relentless, sent a gadfly to sting her endlessly, driving her from continent to continent. You can almost hear the buzzing in the gallery air, a sound that's half insect, half accusation. The fresco darkens toward its edges, and in the shadows Io stumbles along rivers and plains. Her hoofs splash in the Nile, her breath steams in the deserts, her eyes widen in terror. And all the while Hera's invisible presence hovers like a storm cloud, directing the gadfly, never letting Io rest. It's here you catch the deeper truth. Hera wasn't punishing Io for who she was, but for what she symbolized. Every mortal woman Zeus touched was a living reminder of Hera's lack of control over her husband. To strike at them was to claw back dignity from an impossible situation. Historians sometimes call this secondary vengeance not aimed at the root cause, but at whatever target remained vulnerable. Still, you wonder. Walking slowly across the gallery, did Hera ever tire of it? Did the buzzing gadfly sound to her like justice, or did it echo her own restless thoughts? At the far end of the room, a mosaic shows Hera lifting a golden peacock feather, eyes glittering across its fan. Her face is carved in profile, stern, yet sorrowful. Was this victory, or simply a reminder of what had been lost? The question lingers as you move toward the next chamber, where more stories of wrath await. The air in the next gallery feels lighter, almost playful, and you notice how the torches along the wall flicker with a kind of mischievous rhythm. The walls here are not filled with grim battles or solemn frescoes, but with delicate carvings of woodland nymphs and mountain caves. Their mouths are open mid-chatter, hands lifted as if frozen in eternal gossip. This is where Echo lingers, the nymph whose fate was sealed by Hera's anger. The story drifts forward like a whisper. Echo, a mountain nymph, had one terrible habit. She loved to talk. Not in the boring sense, but in the endless, dazzling stream of chatter that could keep anyone distracted. Zeus, unsurprisingly, found her very useful. When he wanted to sneak off to his flings, Echo's voice was his cover. She would distract Hera with long, winding stories, just enough delay to let Zeus slip away unnoticed. Now pause for a historical detour. In ancient Greece, storytelling wasn't just entertainment. It was power. Homer's Gilead and Odyssey were sung aloud, shaping memory itself. People who could hold a crowd with words had influence in ways that even kings envied. So, when you think of Echo, picture her not only as a chatty nymph, but as a kind of mythic stand-in for oral tradition itself. Some historians even suggest she might represent the anxiety around memory and repetition. Since myths were preserved through retelling, of course, Hera didn't care about literary theory. She discovered Echo's trick and unleashed a punishment sharp and strange. She robbed Echo of her own voice. From that moment, Echo could never speak first. She could only repeat the last words spoken to her. Imagine the horror for someone who thrived on endless chatter. It would be like a musician condemned to strum only the last chord of any song they heard. And here comes the quirky tidbit. In some late versions of the myth, Hera didn't just silence Echo out of anger, she was jealous of her too. Ancient gossip says Hera suspected that Zeus might have liked Echo's company a little too much, not just as a cover story. So, perhaps, it wasn't just punishment. It was rivalry cloaked in discipline. You step closer to the carvings and hear faint echoes bouncing in the chamber. When you whisper, "Hello," the walls toss it back. "Hello." It's eerie, but also oddly soothing, like the room is keeping you company without ever offering new words. And then the story bends toward Narcissus. You know the one. Echo falls for him, but when she tries to confess her love, all she can do is repeat his last words. "I love you," she longs to say, but instead she parrots his dismissive tone back at him. The pain of being silenced becomes the deeper pain of unrequited love. And when Narcissus falls in love with his own reflection, Echo dwindles away until nothing remains but her voice. Historians still argue whether Hera ever thought about this outcome. Did she intend Echo to vanish so tragically? Or did she just want her silenced and moved on? That uncertainty clings to the myth-like mist. You can't quite tell whether Hera's wrath was carefully targeted or simply reckless. And the echoes themselves? You can't help noticing how science later swooped in. The Greeks had no explanation for why voices bounce in caves and valleys, so they turned it into myth. Hera's curse gave shape to an acoustic phenomenon. That's how myth often works, filling in the blanks where physics had not yet arrived. The torchlight glitters on the carvings of Narcissus gazing into water, Echo lurking in the background, her mouth open but powerless. You feel the loneliness woven through the stone, the ache of words unsaid, and beneath it all, you sense Hera's shadow, her fury echoing across lives she'd barely touched directly. A joke bubbles up. Soft as the torch crackle, Hera was basically the first person to invent the mute button. Except hers wasn't temporary, it was permanent. Imagine how many modern meetings could have used that kind of divine power. Still, standing in this gallery, you can't escape the undertone of sorrow. Echo's chatter had been a shield against Hera's rage, but the shield turned into her downfall. And all the while, Zeus carried on unbothered, as though Hera's fury never touched its true target. As you walk toward the far archway, the whispers in the walls trail behind you. They repeat your steps, your sighs, even the soft scrape of your sandals. Every sound doubled, never original. And you wonder if that's the real curse, not just silence, but the endless reminder of what you've lost. The corridor narrows, the walls pressed with images of weary women carrying bundles, their faces strained. You know you've arrived at the tale of Leto, another mortal, or in this case, a Titaness who drew Hera's unrelenting jealousy. The air feels tense, as though the torches themselves hesitate to flicker too loudly. Leto was no ordinary fling. She carried Zeus's children twins who would become Apollo and Artemis, two of the most important deities in the Greek pantheon. But pregnancy in Hera's world was not something that simply unfolded. It was a battlefield. Hera, determined to sabotage, issued a decree forbidding any land touched by the sun from offering Leto a place to give birth. Picture the cruelty of that order. Every island, every continent, every patch of earth became off-limits. A divine eviction notice nailed across the globe. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In the ancient Mediterranean, childbirth was already precarious. Archaeologists have found charms and amulets meant to protect mothers, along with shrines to gods like Eileithyia, the goddess of safe delivery. Hera's mythic decree tapped into that very real cultural fear, the terror of having nowhere safe. To bring life into the world. But there's a quirky tidbit tucked into the story. Some versions say that Hera, in addition to banning land, actually kidnapped Eileithyia, the goddess of childbirth, to prevent labor from starting. Imagine literally holding the midwife hostage to stop a baby from being born. That's not just micromanagement. That's divine-level overkill. Still, myths rarely stay neat. Eventually, Leto found refuge on Delos, a tiny, rocky island that, according to the poets, wasn't considered land in the usual sense. It floated, unmoored, and thus slipped through Hera's prohibition. There, after days of pain and wandering, Leto delivered her twins. Artemis first, who then helped her mother deliver Apollo, a pair of godly children born out of loophole lawyering. Historians still argue whether the floating island motif was symbolic. Was Delos actually mobile? Or was it simply myth's way of saying the island was remote and marginal? Some scholars think Delos was elevated in story because it became an important cult site for Apollo. Others suggest the floating imagery hinted at a ritual origin, where unclaimed land was sacred for liminal events like birth. Either way, Hera's wrath inadvertently highlighted Delos, cementing it as a religious center. You glance at the carvings along the gallery walls, Leto trudging across deserts, leaning against boulders, clutching her belly while nymphs look away in pity. The desperation feels almost modern, like someone frantically searching for a hospital bed, while every door is locked. Hera's anger here wasn't a lightning strike or a sudden curse. It was a slow, grinding exile. And yet, even in this cruelty, you catch a strange undertone. Hera's fury didn't just punish Leto. It reshaped geography, mythology, and ritual. Entire temples rose later on Delos to honor Apollo. The island's fame built on Hera's initial blockade. It's almost like every act of wrath spun unintended consequences, adding more weight to her legacy. The gallery ends with a mural of Hera herself, standing tall with a scepter, watching Leto crouch in exhaustion. Her face is neither smirking nor weeping, just implacable. The kind of expression that says, "You will learn not to cross me, even if the cost is monumental." And yet, standing there, you can't help but wonder, did she ever think the twins would one day shine brighter than almost any god but Zeus himself? Was she shaping her own rivals without meaning to? As the torches sputter, you realize you've been holding your breath, almost as though Hera's decree had stretched into the room around you, forbidding rest itself. You let it go slowly, step forward, and prepare to follow the story into darker corners, where Hera's wrath grows even more tangled with her family. You step into the next chamber, where the walls are etched with images of children, heroes, and small figures caught in impossible predicaments. Here, the story turns to Heracles, perhaps the most famous mortal victim of Hera's fury. You feel the weight immediately. The air itself seems charged, as if it's holding its breath in anticipation of another divine storm. The mainstream historical fact: Heracles, son of Zeus and Alcmene, was one of the greatest heroes of Greek myth, celebrated for his extraordinary strength and cunning. His tales were widely retold in art, theatre, and poetry, with the 12 labors becoming a sort of moral and heroic blueprint for Greek culture. These stories were meant to teach lessons, entertain, and uphold the cultural ideal of perseverance in the face of impossible odds. But the quirky tidbit: Hera hated Heracles from the very start. so much so that even before he was born, she tried to prevent his birth. When Alcmene was ready to deliver, Hera sent Eileithyia, the goddess of childbirth, to delay labor. At the same time, she caused all the midwives to tie their hands, creating an almost farcical scene in which the mother struggled under impossible conditions. Hera's wrath didn't wait for maturity. It started in utero, proving that for her, no minor offense went unpunished. Historians still argue whether Hera's actions were purely spiteful, or part of a broader narrative function. Was she simply the archetype of jealous wives? Or did her enmity serve to highlight the trials and resilience required of heroes? Either way, her antagonism sets the stage for Heracles' legendary life. Forcing him to prove himself continually, you move closer to a mosaic showing infant. You linger near the mosaic of infant Heracles, and the scene feels almost cinematic. The serpents, dark and sinuous, coil toward him, hissing with lethal intent, while his tiny hands squeeze them with a force that no mortal infant should possess. You can almost hear the crackle of their scales and the hiss that carries across centuries. Hera had sent them in a single-minded attempt to end his life before he could even walk. It's both terrifying and absurd, like being attacked by snakes during your own baby shower. The mainstream historical fact, the strangling of the serpents, is among the earliest heroic exploits attributed to Heracles, establishing him as someone who could face overwhelming odds from birth. In Greek culture, early demonstrations of strength and bravery often marked a hero as destined for greatness. This tale was retold in vase paintings and sculpture to underscore that divine favor, or disfavor shaped mortal life dramatically. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some versions claim that Heracles' father, Zeus, was hiding nearby, doing nothing, because in mythology, even gods like to see just how much chaos could play out. Imagine modern parenting if the father god just leaned against the crib, whistling while infants fought snakes. It's simultaneously humorous and horrifying. Historians still argue whether these serpents were symbolic of obstacles in life, divine tests, or literal threats meant to dramatize Hera's jealousy. Was this a story to teach caution, resilience, or the inevitability of suffering when mortals crossed paths with gods? The ambiguity gives the myth layers that have fascinated scholars for centuries. You step closer to the mosaic, noticing the fine details, the tension in Heracles' infant arms, the gleam in his tiny eyes, the subtle shivering of the serpents' bodies. You almost feel the heat of Hera's anger radiating from the ceiling above. She wasn't just angry, she was invested, meticulous, determined. Her fury created challenges that shaped destinies, even as a baby. Heracles' life is defined by Hera's wrath. This is a recurring motif in Greek myths, divine jealousy acting as the unseen force, guiding mortal paths. Every labor, every battle, every triumph is entangled with the queen of the gods' resentment. It's less about personal animosity and more about illustrating how heroes must navigate a world where cosmic powers influence every move. A faint chuckle escapes you, thinking about how Hera's wrath inadvertently ensured that Heracles would be legendary. Without her interference, he might have grown up as a strong man, sure, but never the subject of epics, theater, and vase paintings. In a way, her anger is the creative engine of mythic storytelling. The torchlight flickers, highlighting the tiny muscles of infant Heracles as he holds the serpents. The gallery seems to hum with tension, a frozen moment of peril that foreshadows centuries of epic exploits. Hera's presence is everywhere, a silent reminder that divine anger, once set in motion, is rarely satisfied. You breathe slowly, letting the enormity of the scene sink in. The infant, the serpents, the quiet fury above all of it signals that Hera's wrath isn't arbitrary. It's formative, shaping not only heroes but entire narratives of human ambition, struggle, and resilience. You step deeper into the hall, the torchlight casting long shadows on frescoes depicting Heracles' adolescence. The boy has grown into a sturdy youth, muscles rippling, eyes sharp with intelligence and determination. But the shadow behind him remains Hera's unyielding anger, which has followed him like a storm cloud. You notice the tension in his stance, the way his hands clench almost subconsciously, anticipating the next challenge. The mainstream historical fact is that Heracles' 12 labors were not just heroic feats. They were a form of penance imposed upon him, partly shaped by Hera's influence. After Hera drove Heracles into a fit of madness in which he tragically killed his own family, he sought purification and redemption. The labor slaying the Nemean lion, capturing the Erymonthian boar, cleaning the Augean stables became both punishment and path to immortality. Ancient Greeks revered these labors as a demonstration of endurance, cleverness, and the hero's ability to navigate divine caprice. But the quirky tidbit is this: Hera didn't just try to kill or sabotage Heracles directly. She often orchestrated obstacles that were ridiculously inconvenient. Take the Augean stables. For instance, 10 years' worth of filth and manure that had never been cleaned. Instead of letting him tackle a straightforward challenge, Hera ensures that the problem is ludicrously complicated. You almost picture her sitting on Olympus with a smirk, thinking, let's make this epic and disgusting. Historians still argue whether Hera's meddling reflects a personal vendetta against Heracles, or a narrative mechanism to highlight human resilience. Was she the overbearing antagonist? Or was it interference simply a plot device to showcase Heracles' cleverness and virtue? Either way, her wrath propels the story forward. You move closer to the fresco of the Nemean lion, its golden mane curling around Heracles' arms as he wrestles the beast. Every muscle in his body strains against invincibility itself. Hera's fingerprints are everywhere the lion's impervious hide is part of her divine obstruction. A problem no mortal could solve without the cleverness that Heracles demonstrates. It's like being given an unsolvable puzzle, but one that the universe will celebrate if you manage it. The hall grows warmer as you pass mosaics of other labors, Heracles capturing the Serene hind, dragging the Erymonthian boar, cleaning stables with ingenuity. Each scene pulses with energy, and you notice Hera subtly present in the margins, watching, interfering, or merely looming as an invisible force. Her anger isn't physical, it's strategic, relentless, and precise. You can almost hear Hera's whispered commentary above the echoes of the gallery. Not yet. Not this one. Try harder. Remember who is watching. Her fury drives the narrative tension, and in every obstacle, you feel the weight of her vigilance. It's a lesson Heracles learns. Survival requires not just strength, but attention, cunning, and awareness of the unseen forces shaping your path. A small, almost comic thought flits across your mind. If Hera were alive today, she'd probably be the ultimate micromanager, sending emails, reminders, and notifications that everyone ignores. You chuckle softly, but the hum of the gallery reminds you this is serious business. Heracles' life is a series of trials that could have ended in death many times, and each one carries the mark of Hera's obsession. The corridor narrows, and the torchlight flickers along the wall, catching on Heracles' determined expression. Even as you step forward, you feel the tension lingering like static in the air, proof that Hera's wrath leaves a long shadow, shaping every heroic tale that passes through the halls of Olympus. You move into a chamber filled with tapestries depicting the lives of mortals, caught in divine quarrels, and your eyes settle on a scene of King Eurystheus, the man who oversaw Heracles' labors. You realize Hera's influence extends far beyond Olympus. She doesn't just target Heracles directly, she manipulates humans to carry out her will. Eurystheus, fearful and petty, becomes her unwitting instrument, assigning impossible tasks to the hero. The mainstream historical fact is that Eurystheus, according to myth, was indeed king of Tiryns and Mycenae. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of his supposed palaces and temples in the region, suggesting that myths were closely intertwined with real political geography. By inserting him into Heracles' story, storytellers anchored divine tales in familiar mortal settings, making the consequences of Hera's wrath feel immediate and tangible. The quirky tidbit: Eurystheus was terrified of Heracles from the start, hiding in a bronze jar or palace whenever the hero approached. Hera cleverly amplified this fear, turning the king into a literal puppet of her anger. Imagine having a co-worker who's both terrified of you and convinced you're ruining the office. All the time, that's Eurystheus, multiplied by divine intimidation. Historians still argue whether Hera's manipulation of mortals was meant to reflect real societal hierarchies or simply dramatize the narrative. Was Eurystheus' fear intended as moral instruction for ancient audiences, a warning that power without courage is useless? Or was it purely mythic exaggeration? Either way, Hera's influence over human players underscores that her wrath isn't confined to gods alone. You walk along the tapestry, noting the fine details, Eurystheus shivering in his palace, Heracles straining under the labors, and somewhere subtle but unmistakable, Hera watching from above, peacock feathers catching the light. She isn't portrayed as malicious without reason. Every action has a strategic, almost chess-like purpose. Her anger functions as both punishment and lesson, shaping the hero and those around him. You imagine her satisfaction when Eurystheus hatches ridiculous plans, each one designed to trip Heracles up. It's almost comical if it weren't terrifying, the king running in panic, issuing decrees, while Heracles performs feats that border on the impossible. Hera's orchestration ensures that human folly and divine challenge collide in spectacular fashion. Even the minor figures in the tapestry, messengers, guards, onlookers, seem affected by Hera's fury. You realize that her wrath creates ripples, not just waves. Every glance, every whisper, every small act of fear or defiance contributes to the narrative tension. It's a reminder that in Greek mythology, even the seemingly minor characters exist to reflect the power dynamics of the gods. A faint, almost ironic thought crosses your mind. Hera might be the ultimate project manager, delegating chaos, ensuring every detail causes maximum challenge. But unlike any human manager, she never sleeps, never forgets, and never compromises. Her wrath is perfectionist-level relentless. You step back, absorbing the scene. The tapestry hums with tension, every thread threaded by Hera's anger, every figure moving under her watchful eye. And as you continue down the hall, you realize that the goddess's fury, once unleashed, shapes lives, legends, and even history itself. The hallway opens into a dim chamber where the walls are crowded with painted depictions of battles, both mortal and divine. You feel a low vibration in the floor, almost like the echo of distant thunder. This is where Hera's interference escalates. She doesn't just hinder Heracles with tasks. She actively pits mortals and heroes against each other. You realize she has become the invisible hand in conflicts, the hidden architect of chaos. The mainstream historical fact is that Greek myths often reflected the precarious nature of war and politics. Heracles' encounters with other heroes and rulers weren't just fanciful stories, they mirrored real-world anxieties about kings, armies, and alliances. By inserting divine manipulation into these conflicts, storytellers reinforced the idea that human actions are never free from the influence of higher powers, whether for good or ill. The quirky tidbit is that Hera didn't rely solely on brute force. She used subtlety, planting ideas, whispering doubts, and stoking rivalries. One myth tells of her sending a madness upon Heracles, during which he inadvertently killed his family, an extreme example of divine gaslighting, if you will. The concept of being pushed to act against one's own best interests by forces beyond understanding seems oddly modern, yet here it is in bronze and paint. Historians still argue whether these tales were meant as moral lessons about human vulnerability, or simply as dramatic exaggeration. Was Hera a symbol of the consequences of jealousy and unchecked power? Or was she simply a narrative device to make stories more compelling? Either way, the result is the same: conflict, struggle, and a shaping of legendary figures. You trace the lines of a mural showing Heracles confronting a lion in a dense forest, unaware that Hera has orchestrated the entire environment. Trees seem to close in, the underbrush is thicker than expected, and the lion is far more aggressive. In this scene, every obstacle feels intentional, almost like a personalized trap. Hera's cunning extends beyond brute fury. It's meticulous, like a strategist arranging a chessboard with pieces you didn't even know existed. And yet, her anger has consequences beyond Heracles. Innocent mortals, minor gods, and even animals often get caught in her schemes. One tapestry shows shepherds fleeing wild boars, unaware that Hera indirectly guided the beasts toward them. It's chaos orchestrated at multiple levels: personal, heroic, and societal. A chuckle bubbles up as you picture Hera with a cosmic notebook, scribbling notes. Asterisk hero struggles? Check. Collateral chaos? Check. Divine satisfaction? Pending. Asterisk her wrath is systematic, never impulsive, and never forgetful. As you step further along the gallery, you notice how the torchlight dances across peacock feathers painted into the borders, a subtle reminder that Hera's presence is always watching, always influencing. You realize that in Greek myth, anger is rarely a momentary flare, it is a long, weaving force that threads through lives, shaping events both big and small. By the time you leave the chamber, the vibrations have faded, but the sense of Hera's meticulous, patient, and far-reaching fury lingers. It's not just anger, it's strategy, legacy, and a quiet assertion of power that mortals and gods alike must navigate. You enter a chamber where the air is thick with golden light reflecting off elaborate mosaics. Here, Hera's wrath takes on an almost theatrical form, manifesting through the story of the Argonauts and the hero Jason. Unlike Heracles, Jason isn't physically indomitable, he's clever, charismatic, and vulnerable. And yet, Hera invests herself in shaping his journey, pushing and prodding events from behind the scenes. The mainstream historical fact, Jason and the Argonauts' expedition for the Golden Fleece, was central to Greek myth, symbolizing exploration, leadership, and heroism. Archaeological evidence places cultic sites dedicated to the Argonauts in Iolcus and Thessaly, highlighting how myths were entwined with real locations and local pride. Jason's journey was not only a story of adventure, but also a reflection of cultural values, such as courage, cunning, and loyalty. Here's the quirky tidbit: Hera, disguised in various forms, aided Jason without revealing herself. She plotted against King Peleus, whose own insecurities created the pretext for the dangerous journey. Imagine your boss being secretly influenced by a goddess while trying to decide if your vacation request is approved, except the stakes are life and death. In some versions, Hera's interventions involve elaborate disguises, clever tricks, and timing so precise it borders on slapstick. Historians still argue whether Hera's role in Jason's tale is benevolent, vindictive, or simply narrative convenience. Was she guiding a favored mortal toward glory, or subtly punishing him for minor missteps? Her actions blur the line between mentorship and manipulation, showing that divine wrath can sometimes appear as assistance depending on who's telling the story. You move closer to the mosaics depicting Jason on the Argo, crewed by heroes from all corners of Greece. Each figure seems tense, aware that dangers lurk at every turn. The ship sails across stylized waves, some painted with hints of monster Scylla, Charybdis, and other mythic terrors. You notice a small figure at the bow, representing Hera, nearly invisible unless you look carefully. Her eyes gleam with satisfaction and anticipation, the architect of both peril and opportunity. The juxtaposition of threat and aid is fascinating. Hera's influence creates a world in which mortals must rely on cunning and bravery, but also navigate invisible pressures. She's the unseen hand guiding outcomes, her wrath not just punitive, but also formative. Her fury can derail a plan, but it can also sharpen the hero, forcing him to exceed ordinary limits. A small ironic thought drifts through your mind. Hera is like a coach who yells at you, sets impossible drills, and then pretends she's cheering but secretly loves the chaos she's orchestrated. Her anger is both instruction and obstacle, teaching mortals and heroes alike that challenges are inseparable from life itself. By the end of the gallery, you step back and take in the full scope. Hera's wrath is everywhere, shaping landscapes, destinies, and hearts. She's not a simple villain. She is a constant, intricate force, proving that anger, carefully directed, can influence worlds far beyond the initial spark. You move into a dimly lit hall, where the frescoes shift focus from heroic exploits to domestic quarrels among the gods. The scene here captures Hera in her most relentless and intimate mode, punishing the wives, children, and consorts of Zeus. It's a reminder that her wrath is not only strategic but deeply personal, a constant response to betrayal that shapes Olympus itself. The mainstream historical fact, Hera was often depicted as the goddess of marriage and family, responsible for maintaining order in both divine and mortal households. Ancient Greeks honored her in festivals like the Hera and built temples at Samos and Argos, emphasizing her centrality in social and religious life. These depictions highlight the tension between her role as protector of marriage and her wrath against those who disrupted it. Here's the quirky tidbit. Hera's vengeance often came with elaborate theatrics. She didn't simply punish, she staged events, sometimes turning minor annoyances into full-blown crises. For instance, she transformed Callisto, a follower of Artemis, into a bear after Zeus' interference. It's a blend of jealousy, moral policing, and divine flair. Hera's wrath had style points. Imagine being cursed into a bear because your boss's spouse was offended. It's absurd, terrifying, and somehow very mythological. Historians still argue whether Hera's actions were genuinely malicious or served a narrative purpose. To demonstrate cosmic justice, was she punishing mortals unfairly, or did these stories function as cautionary tales about loyalty, obedience, and navigating social hierarchies? The debate lingers like incense smoke in the temple halls. You approach the fresco depicting Callisto, now a bear with a human gaze filled with fear and sorrow. Hera is barely in the scene, yet her influence is undeniable. The transformation is swift, precise, and permanent, a signature of her anger's efficiency. Every detail in the brushstrokes emphasizes the tension between human vulnerability and divine authority. The indirectness of her wrath is fascinating. Hera rarely intervened in ways that were straightforward. She worked behind the scenes, turning allies against one another, sending supernatural threats, and weaving fate so that her targets could not easily escape. You can almost hear her whispering instructions, invisible strings pulled taut, controlling events from Olympus with meticulous care. You notice a minor figure in the corner, Arcas, Callisto's son, unaware that his mother has been transformed. The tragedy here is twofold: loss of identity and separation from loved ones. Hera's anger does not always aim for immediate satisfaction. Sometimes it lingers, shaping the future in ways both cruel and unintended. A humorous yet grim thought crosses your mind. Hera could easily have been the original life. Coach, except her methods were terrifyingly absolute. Discipline, punishment, cosmic lessons all delivered without negotiation. As you step back, the hall seems to echo with the soft growls and whimpers of mythic bears and mortals alike. Hera's presence is pervasive, her wrath both intimate and universal, reminding you that divine anger has long shadows and far-reaching consequences. The corridor narrows into a cooler, quieter chamber, and the frescoes here are intimate, almost eerie. You see Hermes slipping through shadows, mortals frozen mid-step, and Hera observing from above, her eyes sharp and calculating. This is where her wrath takes on an almost psychological dimension: manipulation, interference, and the orchestration of suspense in human and divine affairs alike. The mainstream historical fact: Greek myths frequently depict Hera as an active influencer of fate. Unlike some gods who intervene sporadically, Hera's involvement is persistent, reflecting her cultural role as a regulator of family and societal order. The Greeks, deeply concerned with propriety, likely projected their anxieties about loyalty and betrayal onto her, using her stories as both cautionary and explanatory narratives. The quirky tidbit is that Hera's interventions often seemed petty by modern standards, yet had immense consequences. For instance, she sent a gadfly to torment Io after Zeus' affair, a small, almost trivial act that resulted in Io wandering vast regions, enduring great suffering. It's a reminder that Hera's wrath didn't need grandeur to be effective. Even minor irritations became epic in scale when, fueled by divine intent. Historians still argue whether such acts reflect narrative exaggeration or genuine attempts to explain natural phenomena and human suffering. Was the gadfly meant as a literal tormentor or a symbolic representation of unrelenting hardship? Scholars debate, but the enduring effect on myth and culture is undeniable. You move closer to the fresco of Io, now fatigued from her wandering, the gadfly ever present. Every brushstroke captures her unease, the subtle tension of wings in motion, and the unrelenting pursuit of a goddess's wrath. You almost feel the sting of the insect yourself. a curious mix of empathy and awe at the intricacy of the myth. Hera's strategy is as much about spectacle as punishment. She crafts narratives in which mortals must confront impossible challenges, testing their endurance, ingenuity, and patience. In doing so, she becomes an architect of fate, turning minor frustrations into enduring legend. You notice in the corners of the murals that even Zeus appears occasionally frustrated, hinting that Hera's cunning extends beyond mortals to her divine peers. A light chuckle escapes you imagining Hera in modern terms. She'd be the ultimate social media strategist crafting drama, orchestrating viral events and subtly influencing outcomes without anyone realizing it. Her wrath operates on multiple planes, creating both narrative tension and cosmic order. As you walk slowly down the hall, observing smaller figures that Argive priests wandering herds, minor deities, you realize that Hera's fury is omnipresent. Her interventions ripple through every corner of the mythic world, shaping events, influencing decisions, and reminding all who dwell within these tales that divine anger is subtle, intricate, and inescapable. By the time you reach the far end, you understand the pattern. Hera's wrath is not a single act, but a continuous thread weaving through generations, shaping stories, characters, and even the moral framework of Greek myth. And as the torchlight dims slightly, you feel the quiet pressure of her unseen hand guiding the chaos around her. You enter a gallery that smells faintly of resin and old stone. The frescoes here dominated by maritime scenes. Ships toss on stormy seas, sailors clutching ropes, and the faint outlines of monsters in the waves. Hera's influence is unmistakable. She doesn't always confront her targets directly sometimes. She engineers the storms, letting chaos unfold like a natural disaster. The mainstream historical fact: Greeks were a seafaring people, and myths about divine interference at sea reflected real fears. Storms were often attributed to gods' whims, and sailors carried charms to appease deities. Hera, though less associated with the sea than Poseidon, appears in some myths indirectly affecting naval journeys, reinforcing the idea that no voyage is free from divine scrutiny. The quirky tidbit: during the voyage of the Argonauts, Hera disguises herself to subtly aid Jason, counterbalancing the dangers posed by other gods. She throws herself into the narrative in creative ways, manipulating events while remaining unseen. Imagine a passenger on a boat, oblivious that a goddess in disguise is steering them away from disaster. It's both comforting and unsettling. Historians still argue whether Hera's involvement in maritime myths symbolizes protection, revenge, or narrative convenience. Some suggest these stories explain natural phenomena and the unpredictable perils of sailing. Others see her as a moral agent, enforcing lessons about obedience, courage, and prudence. Either interpretation emphasizes the indirect yet powerful reach of her wrath. You follow the waves across the fresco, Io wandering rivers under Hera's gadfly, Jason navigating the Argo, and Heracles in his various labors, each affected by her subtle machinations. Hera's presence isn't a crash of thunder. It's a careful orchestration of circumstances that forces mortals and heroes alike to adapt, struggle, and often suffer. A modern thought flits into your mind. Hera would probably excel as a strategic consultant always. 3 moves ahead, calculating risks and ensuring outcomes align with her objectives, all without stepping into the boardroom. Her wrath isn't reactive, it's calculated, layered, and inescapable once set in motion. You notice tiny details along the fresco edges, small birds circling overhead, the foam of the waves painted with meticulous care, subtle signs of divine influence embedded in the environment. Every detail seems intentional, a visual reminder that Hera's reach extends even into the smallest facets of life. As you pause near the depiction of a sinking ship, you realize the lesson: divine anger in Greek mythology isn't always violent or immediate. Sometimes it's patience, observation, and manipulation, forcing heroes and mortals to navigate challenges while the goddess watches, guiding events like a shadowy hand on a complex chessboard. By the time you leave the gallery, the smell of resin lingers, and the sound of imaginary waves echoes faintly. Hera's presence feels less like fury in your face and more like a slow, unrelenting pressure shaping the course of stories, lives, and destinies. You move forward, anticipating the next twist of her intricate wrath. The next room feels almost oppressive, the ceiling low and the light dimmed to a golden hue. Here, the frescoes depict the trials of the mortal family members of Zeus' lovers. You immediately notice a recurring pattern. Hera's wrath doesn't target Zeus directly, and she often spares her own divine peers, but mortals and demigods, they pay the price. It's a subtle, terrifying hierarchy of punishment, the mainstream historical fact in Greek mythology. Divine retribution often fell hardest on mortals. Hera exemplifies this principle, demonstrating how the gods' personal vendettas could dictate the fates of humans. Ancient Greeks internalized these myths as moral cautionary tales. Interactions with the divine were fraught with danger, and mortal suffering often reflected the whims of forces beyond comprehension. The quirky tidbit: some myths suggest Hera even manipulated the seasons to punish mortals indirectly. Imagine crops failing or livestock wandering off because the queen of the gods decided to vent her anger subtly. Her wrath wasn't always dramatic and immediate, it could be slow, creeping, and persistent, like water gradually eroding stone. Historians still argue whether these indirect punishments reflect real-world natural phenomena or narrative exaggeration. Did Greeks assign divine motives to accidents and misfortune? Or were these stories intended to emphasize human vulnerability and moral responsibility? Either interpretation highlights Hera's role as a figure of both fear and respect. You approach a mural showing Ino, sister of Semele, fleeing with her children while Hera's invisible hand seems to manipulate the winds. Ino is terrified, and her expression captures the helplessness of mortals caught in divine schemes. You feel a strange empathy. Hera's wrath is so precise it never misses, yet so patient that it can stretch over generations. A small, ironic thought drifts through your mind. Hera could have been the ultimate bureaucrat of suffering, logging grievances, tracking offenders, and applying punishments with meticulous care. Her wrath is strategic, almost administrative, proving that divine anger doesn't need immediate spectacle to be devastating. Every figure in the fresco seems affected: children, parents, servants, animals, all moving in a choreography set by Hera's judgment. The gallery walls vibrate with tension, a visual echo of her influence, reminding you that in Greek mythology, divine anger is not a single event but a long thread weaving through lives, shaping destinies and creating narratives that endure. You step toward the next archway, the flickering torchlight casting shadows that mimic the subtlety of Hera's interventions. Her wrath lingers, shaping each path, influencing each choice and ensuring that mortals, heroes, and gods alike remain acutely aware of her unyielding presence. The next gallery opens like a quiet forest glade, the walls adorned with depictions of transformation and punishment. You feel the chill of inevitability, the way Hera's influence extends even to the natural world. Here, the myths focus on the children of Zeus' affairs and the ways they suffer, evolve, or vanish entirely under her relentless gaze. The mainstream historical fact: metamorphosis was a recurring motif in Greek mythology. Transformations, whether into animals, stars, or constellations, often signified punishment, protection, or memorialization. Hera frequently employed these transformations as instruments of wrath, demonstrating that divine anger could alter not only lives but forms, leaving permanent marks on both myth and the imagination of ancient audiences. The quirky tidbit: consider the story of Aglaros, a mortal woman who attempted to hinder Mercury's mission and was turned into stone by Hera. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing you've become a statue because a goddess disapproved of your curiosity or disobedience. It's simultaneously absurd and chilling, a testament to Hera's penchant for dramatic flair in enforcing her will. Historians still argue whether these transformations are symbolic or literal. Within the context of the myths, some scholars interpret them as moral allegories about obedience and consequence, while others suggest they reflect ancient attempts to explain natural features, such as unusual rock formations or the constellations, through narrative. Hera's wrath is both literary device and cosmic justification. you examine a fresco depicting the transformation of the Pleiades into stars. Their grief is palpable, frozen mid-motion as if the brush itself mourned their fate. Hera's presence is subtle but undeniable. A shadow in the corner, a glint of peacock feather, a stern gaze that orchestrates the unfolding punishment. It's not just a visual story, but a meditation on the consequences of divine jealousy. A thought surfaces. Almost humorous, Hera might have been the first interior designer of cosmic consequences, arranging events, forms, and even celestial bodies to reflect her displeasure. Her wrath leaves traces everywhere, turning lives and landscapes into permanent reminders of her authority. You notice the minor details. Animals in the scene appear startled. Trees bend unnaturally, and the sky glows with an otherworldly light. Each element hints at the breadth of Hera's influence, suggesting that no corner of existence is exempt from her judgment. The gallery feels alive with stories, each transformation a testament to her power. Mortals vanish, demigods adapt, and heroes are tested all under the quiet orchestration of Hera's wrath. You step carefully, aware that each mural, each brushstroke, carries a lesson in vigilance, respect, and the subtle, persistent force of divine anger. By the time you reach the far edge, you understand that in Greek myth, Hera's wrath isn't an isolated event, it's a continuous thread, shaping the natural, mortal, and divine worlds alike, leaving consequences that ripple through time, memory, and culture. You enter a vast chamber with high ceilings, where frescoes of warriors and kings dominate the walls. Here, Hera's wrath intersects with politics and succession, demonstrating that her jealousy and anger aren't limited to personal vendettas, they ripple outward, affecting entire cities and dynasties. You notice scenes of rulers faltering, battles delayed or lost, and heroes diverted from their paths, all subtly orchestrated by her unseen hand. The mainstream historical fact: Greek myths often serve to explain political instability and succession crises. Leaders were frequently depicted as being under divine influence, reinforcing the idea that fortune, misfortune, and power were guided by gods like Hera. Her role underscores how mythology functioned as both cultural storytelling and moral lesson, linking divine wrath to real-world consequences. The quirky tidbit: Hera is said to have intervened in the Trojan War, sending obstacles to ensure that mortals and demigods faced challenges in line with her grudges. While Zeus held broader sway over the war, Hera's influence manifests in seemingly small but crucial ways: miscommunication among allies, delays, and strategic diversions. Imagine a divine project manager tweaking outcomes without anyone realizing it. Historians still argue whether these depictions reflect actual ritualized beliefs about divine interference in governance, or whether they are narrative devices used to dramatize human affairs. Either way, Hera's wrath demonstrates that power struggles among mortals were rarely purely human. They were entangled with divine oversight. You move closer to a fresco depicting Perseus, who must undertake dangerous quests in part due to Hera's subtle pressures. While she never directly attacks him, her presence is implicit in the obstacles he encounters: the serpents, the labyrinthine paths, and the dangerous political negotiations. Hera's wrath is strategic. It molds character, tests ingenuity, and enforces a cosmic sense of justice or balance. A humorous thought drifts through your mind: Hera would probably excel in corporate politics, today nudging rivals, engineering setbacks, and ensuring her employees or mortals prove themselves under pressure. Her wrath isn't chaotic, it's careful, precise, and all-encompassing, with outcomes measured over decades rather than minutes. Even minor figures in the murals, courtiers, soldiers, and townspeople, bear the weight of her influence. Each decision, mistake, or act of courage can be traced back to her subtle manipulations. Her wrath is pervasive, omniscient, and patient, like a master weaver threading a tapestry that encompasses both mortal ambition and divine intervention. By the time you exit the chamber, the weight of Hera's strategy feels almost tangible. She is not merely a goddess of anger, she is a force that shapes the political, personal, and heroic trajectories of the Greek mythic world, leaving long shadows that extend far beyond her immediate acts. The next corridor narrows, walls lined with small panels depicting courtly intrigue among gods and mortals alike. You feel a shift in Hera's wrath. It's less about brute force or dramatic punishment here, and more about subtle manipulation, the kind that bends hearts, minds, and loyalties. It's psychological, almost surgical in precision. The mainstream historical fact, Hera's role as goddess of marriage and protector of women's interests often extended to influencing human relationships. In ancient Greece, marital fidelity and domestic order were culturally crucial, and myths about Hera underscored the consequences of violating these social norms. Her wrath, therefore, serves as both divine justice and societal instruction. The quirky tidbit: Hera occasionally used trickery so complex it verges on comedic. In one tale, she convinces Zeus to promise a reward for a task, only to manipulate events so the reward becomes a trial or punishment for the recipient. Imagine a cosmic version of a prankster boss whose schemes leave everyone scrambling. It's diabolical, creative, and entirely Hera. Historians still argue whether these stories reflect genuine societal anxieties about fidelity and power, or whether they're narrative exaggerations designed to entertain and moralize. Either way, the outcome is clear. Hera's wrath extends beyond physical acts into manipulation of perception, decision-making, and trust. You pause before a panel depicting Jason negotiating with Peleus, unaware that Hera is subtly steering the situation. Every word, glance, and hesitation is influenced by her unseen hand. She doesn't confront Jason directly. She nudges, obstructs, and ensures outcomes that serve her broader purpose. Her anger here is quiet but potent, a demonstration that control need not be loud to be effective. A light chuckle escapes you imagining Hera managing modern diplomacy, emails, subtle misinformation, timed announcements. She'd probably thrive in today's political landscape. Her wrath functions not through direct assault but through shaping circumstances, so that heroes and mortals stumble, learn, or adapt. Even minor characters in these panels, the courtiers, messengers, or guards, reflect the ripples of her influence. Their choices, hesitations, and missteps are subtly orchestrated to produce maximum effect, demonstrating that Hera's anger is comprehensive, long-term, and intricately calculated. As you move toward the exit of this corridor, you realize the overarching lesson. Hera's wrath is not chaotic. It's intelligent, strategic, and enduring. It doesn't just punish. It molds behavior, alters outcomes, and leaves a lasting imprint on the worlds of both mortals and gods. The goddess's patience and subtlety make her fury all the more formidable, a quiet storm shaping every facet of life it touches. You step into a chamber where the frescoes are dominated by depictions of sibling rivalries among gods and demigods, each conflict subtly orchestrated by Hera. Here, her wrath isn't simply about vengeance, it's about control, influence, and maintaining her position as Queen of Olympus. The air feels charged, as if even the shadows anticipate her interventions. The mainstream historical fact, Greek mythology often portrays Hera as deeply involved in family dynamics among gods. Her jealousy and protective instincts manifest in both overt punishment and subtle manipulation, reinforcing social ideals about hierarchy, respect, and order. Temples and festivals in her honor underscore her centrality in Greek cultural and religious life. The quirky tidbit: Hera sometimes incites rivalry among siblings to achieve her goals. In one myth, she subtly encourages tension between Apollo and Artemis, or even among the children of Zeus' mortal lovers, ensuring that discord creates opportunities for her influence to expand. It's a divine version of divide and conquer, and it demonstrates her strategic patience. Historians still argue whether these interventions reflect real familial anxieties projected onto divine figures or serve purely narrative purposes. Was Hera's wrath a cautionary tale about sibling jealousy and obedience? Or was it a dramatic device to explore the complexity of divine relationships? Either way, the stories underscore her meticulous attention to the consequences of interpersonal dynamics. You walk along a mural depicting Heracles facing minor demigod rivals, unaware that Hera has stoked rivalry between them. Every glance, challenge, and hesitation is subtly guided by her hand. Her wrath doesn't need to manifest as storms or serpents. It thrives in the intricate web of human and divine psychology, the tension that simmers beneath the surface. A humorous thought drifts across your mind. Hera would probably be an excellent reality show, producer engineering conflicts, anticipating reactions, and letting chaos play out to maximize drama. Her anger functions as narrative shaping rather than just punishment, emphasizing strategy over spectacle, even the smallest details, gestures, expressions. Minor setbacks reflect her influence. Each demigod's choice, each sibling's hesitation, becomes a thread in a larger tapestry of consequence that she weaves invisibly. Her wrath, patient and enduring, affects not only heroes but the networks of relationships surrounding them. As you leave the chamber, the sense of Hera's pervasive, subtle power lingers. Her fury isn't loud or obvious. It's strategic, shaping outcomes over time, guiding mortals and gods alike with a hand that is unseen but profoundly felt. The shadows of sibling conflict echo her meticulous orchestration. A quiet testament to the reach of divine wrath, the hall ahead is narrow and dim, the walls covered with frescoes depicting quests, battles, and encounters with monsters. Here, Hera's wrath is intertwined with prophecy, fate, and the unavoidable tension of destiny. You feel the electric hum of inevitability, the sense that every action has already been influenced by her unseen hand, the mainstream historical fact in Greek mythology. Prophecy and fate were often inseparable from divine intervention. Hera frequently uses these forces to guide, obstruct, or test mortals and heroes, demonstrating that her wrath operates both on the visible plane and the predetermined threads of destiny. Oracles and seers often interpreted events as being shaped by divine forces, reflecting the cultural importance of understanding and appeasing the gods. The quirky tidbit: Hera sometimes manipulates prophecies indirectly. For example, she may inspire misinterpretation or nudge circumstances so that a foretold outcome becomes more challenging or ironic. Imagine a cosmic game of telephone where her whispers twist predictions, just enough to cause maximum confusion. Mortals, desperate to follow prophecy accurately, often stumble precisely because she engineered subtle obstacles. Historians still argue whether these prophetic manipulations are symbolic or intended to depict real Greek beliefs about destiny and divine influence. Was Hera demonstrating that humans must navigate uncertainty, or was she simply a plot device to heighten drama? Either interpretation underscores her role in shaping events beyond mere emotion. You linger before a fresco depicting Oedipus at the threshold of his tragic fate, unaware that Hera's subtle influence has nudged circumstances that complicate his path. The tension in the artwork is palpable. Every gesture, every look, every accidental meeting feels orchestrated by a goddess whose wrath is patient, persistent, and profoundly effective. A small laugh escapes you at the thought of Hera as a cosmic game master, delighting in complex plots and the missteps of mortals who believe they are acting independently. Her wrath here is about shaping outcomes through influence rather than direct punishment. A long, careful strategy that alters the course of entire stories. Even minor figures, shepherds, servants, and strangers are caught in the web, their actions and choices influenced by invisible forces. You notice how the fresco artist emphasizes expressions of doubt, hesitation, and surprise, visual cues that underscore Hera's subtle orchestration. As you step back and examine the gallery, it becomes clear Hera's wrath isn't just reactive, it's preemptive. It creates tension, tests resilience, and ensures that the outcomes of prophecies are never straightforward. Mortals, heroes, and even other gods are caught in her intricate designs, shaping fate with a precision that is almost surgical. By the time you move on, the sense of careful, calculated control lingers. Hera's fury is patient and persistent, shaping destiny itself while remaining largely invisible, proving that the quiet, strategic wrath can be more potent than any direct assault. You enter a spacious chamber filled with images of festivals, processions, and sacred rituals. The walls are alive with color, yet beneath the celebration you sense tension. Hera's wrath is never absent. Even in scenes meant to honor her, she oversees every offering, every procession, ensuring that respect and obedience are observed or that consequences are felt. The mainstream historical fact: Hera was widely worshipped across the Greek world, with temples, shrines, and festivals dedicated to her, including the Heraia and games in her honor at Olympia. These rituals reflected her role as protector of marriage, women, and social order, highlighting her importance in daily life and the moral fabric of society. Her myths reinforced the sacredness of these observances, showing that ignoring or offending her carried serious repercussions. The quirky tidbit: Hera sometimes interfered with festival preparations in stories, causing mix-ups, accidents, or embarrassing missteps among mortals attempting to honor her. Imagine priests tripping over sacrificial goats or ceremonial garlands falling apart because a goddess was having a quiet fit over improper protocol. It's equal parts comic and terrifying, a reminder that her wrath can transform the mundane into the dramatic. Historians still argue whether these stories illustrate actual societal concerns about ritual correctness or simply dramatize divine temperaments for narrative flair. Either way, they underscore her role as both moral enforcer and narrative catalyst, making sure that respect and vigilance remain central to human-divine interactions. You approach a mural depicting a procession of women bearing offerings, each step meticulously observed by Hera, her gaze sharp, her posture commanding. You notice subtle details. One figure hesitates, a garland slips, and Hera's shadow seems to grow, emphasizing the consequences of inattention or error. It's a lesson in diligence, obedience, and the quiet, persistent weight of divine expectation. A small laugh escapes you imagining Hera is a festival organizer who micromanages everything from seating arrangements to sacrificial schedules, ensuring maximum effect for her wrath if anyone falters. Her anger is not always dramatic or violent. Sometimes it's about demonstrating control, precision, and attention to detail. Even minor participants, attendants, musicians, and animals are affected by her oversight. Every gesture and sound in these rituals reflects her influence, a reminder that nothing escapes her notice. The faint hum of the frescoed crowd echoes in your mind, a visual symphony of tension, respect, and divine scrutiny. By the time you step back from the procession murals, it's clear that Hera's wrath permeates even moments of celebration. Her influence shapes behavior, ensures order, and teaches that honoring the divine is never optional. Even in joy and festivity, her quiet, meticulous anger shapes every outcome, leaving mortals and heroes alike aware of her ever-present authority. You enter a shadowed gallery where the frescoes are dominated by mortal tragedies, many of them connected to the children of Zeus. Here, Hera's wrath takes on a slow, almost relentless form, shaping events over years or even generations. The air is heavy with inevitability, a reminder that her influence lingers long after a single confrontation. The mainstream historical fact: Greek myths frequently depict divine anger as enduring and far-reaching. Hera's interventions often extend beyond immediate retribution to shape destinies, demonstrating that the gods' actions were not momentary, but woven into the ongoing narrative of human and heroic lives. Festivals, rituals, and literature reinforce this understanding, emphasizing the moral and social weight of divine displeasure. The quirky tidbit: Hera's punishments sometimes involved long-term inconveniences, rather than dramatic spectacles. For example, she cursed the descendants of mortals who displeased her, ensuring that their misfortune persisted across generations. Imagine a cosmic family feud so persistent that even centuries later, you're still paying the price. Hera's wrath as ultimate karmic bookkeeping. Historians still argue whether these multi-generational punishments reflect real Greek beliefs about inherited sin and divine justice, or whether they are narrative devices designed to sustain tension across stories. Either way, they highlight her capacity for strategic, long-term influence rather than impulsive vengeance. You examine a mural depicting the family of Cadmus, illustrating how Hera's subtle interference affects successive generations. Mortals and heroes alike struggle under burdens they cannot fully comprehend, their fates intertwined with divine intent. Even small acts of piety or neglect can trigger long-term consequences, a testament to her careful orchestration. A humorous thought occurs: Hera could have been the ultimate estate planner, meticulously ensuring that debts, favors, and punishments are properly distributed over time. Her wrath operates on decades or centuries, demonstrating patience and meticulous planning that few humans could emulate. Every figure in the fresco, from children to elders, is subtly affected. Gestures, expressions, and positioning emphasize vulnerability, uncertainty, and anticipation, reinforcing the idea that no one is exempt from her scrutiny. Hera's anger is pervasive, invisible, and strategic, a constant shaping force that guides human action through fear, respect, and caution. As you leave the gallery, the echoes of mortal struggles linger in your mind. Hera's wrath is not fleeting, it persists, weaving through generations and shaping the moral, social, and heroic fabric of Greek myth. The quiet, enduring force of her anger is a reminder that in the mythic world, consequences are long, far-reaching, and inescapable. You step into a chamber awash with twilight tones, the walls filled with depictions of divine councils and secret plots. Here, Hera's wrath manifests as political strategy among the gods, showing that her anger is as much about influence and control as it is about punishment. She operates through subtle pressure, persuasion, and manipulation, shaping outcomes without ever raising a hand. The mainstream historical fact: Greek myths frequently depict gods as participants in divine politics, often influencing mortal affairs indirectly. Hera, as Queen of Olympus, exercised authority not through direct confrontation but by guiding alliances, nudging decisions, and enforcing her priorities, reflecting the Greeks' understanding of power as layered and hierarchical. The quirky tidbit: Hera sometimes employed humorous or ironic methods in her scheming. In some tales, she disguises herself or sends seemingly trivial omens to confuse, mislead, or test mortals and lesser gods. Imagine receiving cryptic advice from a disguised goddess, only to realize later that every misstep was part of her intricate plan. Her wrath is cunning, patient, and in some ways, delightfully theatrical. Historians still argue whether these political interventions reflect societal anxieties about leadership and governance, or are purely narrative embellishments. Either interpretation underscores Hera's dual role as enforcer and strategist, demonstrating that divine anger can operate through intellect, foresight, and long-term orchestration rather than brute force. You linger before a mural depicting Hera whispering counsel to Zeus, or nudging minor gods to act in ways that serve her ends. The subtleties are fascinating. Every gesture, every glance, every shift in posture conveys her influence. Mortals and gods alike are caught in the web of her design, often unaware of the forces guiding their actions. A light thought crosses your mind: Hera might have thrived as a modern diplomat or CEO, excelling at negotiations, strategic timing, and the management of power dynamics. Her wrath here isn't about immediate punishment, it's about shaping behavior, outcomes, and loyalties with a quiet, almost imperceptible hand. Even minor figures in the fresco, messengers, attendants, or observers, reflect her influence. Their hesitations, mistakes, and decisions serve as evidence of her meticulous orchestration. Hera's wrath is omnipresent yet subtle, a reminder that power in the mythic world is as much about cunning and foresight as it is about force. As you exit the chamber, you carry with you the sense that Hera's fury is pervasive, strategic, and long-lasting. She is a master of manipulation, a subtle architect of fate, and a force whose influence shapes divine politics, mortal lives, and mythic narratives alike, leaving a legacy that is impossible to ignore. You enter a shadowed chamber where the walls depict epic confrontations between heroes and monsters. Yet upon closer inspection, it becomes clear that Hera's influence threads through every challenge. She rarely intervenes directly here. Instead, she manipulates circumstances, ensuring that obstacles are maximized and that mortal ingenuity is tested to its limits. The mainstream historical fact: Greek mythology often emphasizes trials as formative experiences for heroes. Heracles, Perseus, and Jason faced seemingly impossible tasks, many indirectly influenced by Hera. These myths underscore the cultural value placed on endurance, cleverness, and resilience. with divine anger functioning as both catalyst and measure of heroism. The quirky tidbit: Hera's wrath sometimes manifests in playful cruelty. In the myth of Heracle's 12 labors, she constantly sends minor complications of river floods. A bull becomes aggressive, or creatures multiply unexpectedly. Think of it as a cosmic obstacle course designed by a goddess with a twisted sense of humor, where every small interference amplifies the challenge. Historians still argue whether Hera's interventions in these trials reflect moral instruction for mortals, narrative tension for audiences, or a combination of both. Did Greeks see these obstacles as lessons in virtue, or simply as entertainment with divine seasoning? The debate lingers in the edges of the frescoes, almost like the whisper of a god. You pause before a mural depicting Heracles wrestling the Nemean lion, aware that Hera's manipulations contributed to the hero facing a challenge that was otherwise insurmountable. Each strike of claw and teeth, each strategic maneuver, is amplified by divine orchestration. Her wrath shapes the hero's journey, testing courage, patience, and ingenuity while highlighting the omnipresent influence of the gods. A faint smile crosses your mind, imagining Hera as an extreme game designer, plotting increasingly difficult levels for her favorite or least favorite mortals. Her anger here is not about vengeance alone. It's about crafting opportunities for growth, testing limits, and proving that even heroes must respect the unseen forces that shape their world. Even minor figures in the mural's villagers, onlookers, and attendants reflect her subtle control. Their reactions, expressions, and movements are carefully composed to show the tension, stakes, and consequences of divine intervention. Hera's wrath, patient and intricate, extends to the smallest details of life, narrative, and environment. By the time you move toward the chamber's exit, you understand that Hera's fury is both meticulous and omnipresent. Her influence shapes challenges, tests limits, and orchestrates the conditions under which mortals and heroes are measured, leaving a legacy of trials and triumphs that reverberates across generations. You step into a chamber suffused with twilight hues, the walls depicting journeys, ambushes, and divine trickery. Here, Hera's wrath takes a more subtle form: misdirection, psychological pressure, and the careful orchestration of events that test both mortal and divine patience. You sense her influence in every misstep, hesitation, and unexpected outcome. The mainstream historical fact: Greek myths often portray heroes as subject to both direct and indirect divine influence. Hera's interventions, in particular, demonstrate the importance the Greeks placed on vigilance, cunning, and the ability to adapt under unpredictable circumstances. Her wrath is a reflection of the belief that human action is never isolated from the wider cosmic order. The quirky tidbit: Hera's misdirection sometimes includes absurdly precise timing. In one myth, she delays reinforcements, causing heroes to encounter monsters at the exact moment their equipment fails or confidence wavers. It's almost as if she enjoys a dramatic pause before calamity, blending suspense with divine judgment. Imagine a chess master who pauses to savor the impact of a carefully placed piece. Hera's wrath is equally calculated. Historians still argue whether these manipulations reflect genuine moral instruction or narrative exaggeration. Was the goddess meant to exemplify the consequences of divine jealousy? Or were these tales constructed to heighten suspense and engagement for their audiences? Either way, her influence on the flow of events is undeniable. You linger before a fresco of Jason navigating treacherous waters, unaware that Hera's subtle nudges create both obstacles and aid. Her wrath is nuanced, shaping circumstances rather than applying brute force, forcing the hero to rely on ingenuity, courage, and observation. Every twist of the river, every hidden reef, seems orchestrated with precision. A right thought occurs: Hera would excel as a director of thrillers, arranging suspenseful moments and forcing characters into high-stakes situations, all while remaining invisible to the audience. Her anger functions as a narrative engine, creating tension and testing resilience rather than delivering immediate punishment. Even minor figures, the crew, villagers, and observers, reflect her orchestration. Hesitations, mistakes, and interactions are all part of her long game, demonstrating that her wrath affects the entire ecosystem of a story. As you step toward the corridor's end, you feel the weight of Hera's omnipresent influence. Her wrath is patient, strategic, and pervasive, shaping outcomes, challenging heroes, and ensuring that the threads of fate are never entirely free from her guiding hand. You enter a hall awash with twilight and torchlight, the frescoes illustrating divine rivalries, mortal struggles, and the subtle orchestration of fate. Hera's wrath here is strategic and enduring, a reminder that her anger is rarely impulsive. It's a continuous influence shaping both immediate events and long-term outcomes, the mainstream historical fact. Greek myths often depict divine anger as a persistent force rather than a momentary flare. Hera's interventions, whether through obstacles, manipulation, or indirect punishment, illustrate the cultural belief that the god's influence pervades every aspect of mortal life. Temples, rituals, and festivals reinforced her presence, reminding worshippers of her vigilance and authority. The quirky tidbit: Hera occasionally employs irony in her punishments, ensuring that the consequences of actions are poetically fitting. For example, she might orchestrate a situation where a hero's success creates unforeseen problems or where an attempted escape leads directly into danger. It's as if she delights in the narrative symmetry of cosmic justice. Historians still argue whether these narrative techniques were intended as moral instruction or as dramatic embellishment. Either interpretation reinforces the idea that Hera's wrath is multifaceted. It instructs, tests, and entertains simultaneously, blending didactic and aesthetic functions. You pause before a mural depicting a hero navigating treacherous terrain, unaware that Hera's subtle hand has created the exact combination of obstacles to test his ingenuity. Every rock, river, and forested path seems designed to challenge, instruct, and illuminate human resilience. Her wrath is not merely punishment, it is formative, shaping character and destiny alike. A whimsical thought crosses your mind. Hera could run the ultimate obstacle course company, designing challenges with perfect difficulty curves and unforeseen twists. Her wrath functions as a test of skill, patience, and adaptability, rather than as a simple expression of anger. Even minor figures, the onlookers, attendants, and animals reflect her influence, their hesitations and reactions carefully choreographed within the mythic narrative. Every element contributes to the sense that nothing in the mythic world escapes her control. As you leave the chamber, the pervasive sense of her strategic, calculated fury lingers. Hera's wrath is not impulsive. It is intelligent, far-reaching, and enduring, shaping events, characters, and stories in ways both subtle and profound, leaving mortals and gods alike forever mindful of her omnipresent authority. The corridor narrows as you move into a chamber where the frescoes depict divine competitions and contests among mortals. Here, Hera's wrath is nuanced, subtle, and meticulously calculated, influencing outcomes without direct confrontation. You notice how her anger manifests not as chaos but as carefully placed challenges that test morality, courage, and endurance. The mainstream historical fact: Greek mythology often uses contests, whether athletic, strategic, or heroic, as a vehicle to demonstrate divine influence. Hera, as queen of Olympus and goddess of marriage and family, frequently intervenes indirectly, ensuring that participants face obstacles aligned with her sense of justice or vengeance. Festivals and competitions in her honor reinforce the social and moral lessons embodied in these myths. The quirky tidbit: Hera sometimes creates absurdly ironic situations during contests. For example, she might ensure that a competitor's advantage becomes a liability at the critical moment, or that a seemingly minor error leads to unexpected consequences. Think of it as a cosmic reality show where the producer is both exacting and delightfully vindictive. Historians still argue whether these contest interventions reflect real social concerns like fairness, honor, and merit, or are primarily narrative devices to heighten tension and moral complexity. Either way, Hera's influence demonstrates that divine anger can be strategic, patient, and psychologically sophisticated. You pause before a mural depicting a contest between two demigods, each unaware that Hera has subtly manipulated the conditions to test resilience, judgment, and integrity. Every movement, glance, and hesitation is orchestrated, demonstrating her ability to craft outcomes without overt displays of power. A wry thought occurs: Hera might excel as a coach or game theorist in a modern setting, designing competitions that teach lessons while testing skill, patience, and adaptability. Her wrath here is creative, precise, and almost pedagogical, emphasizing the didactic potential of divine anger. Even minor figures, the audience, assistants, and heralds show the ripple effects of her influence. Their actions, reactions, and expressions all underscore the omnipresent impact of her calculated interventions. Hera's wrath is patient and meticulous, shaping outcomes in ways both visible and invisible. As you leave the chamber, you realize that Hera's anger is more than punishment. It is an instrument of narrative and moral architecture. She tests, guides, and challenges, ensuring that heroes, mortals, and even minor participants navigate trials under her watchful eye. Forever aware of the subtle but persistent force of her influence, you step into a quieter, dimly lit gallery. The frescoes here depicting divine interventions in love, marriage, and family. Hera's wrath is personal, persistent, and deeply intertwined with human relationships, showing that even the smallest acts of betrayal or perceived disrespect can ripple outward with lasting consequences. The mainstream historical fact: Hera was venerated as the goddess of marriage and protector of women's interests. In myths, she frequently punished Zeus' lovers, their children, and anyone who disrupted domestic or social harmony. These stories reinforced cultural values about fidelity, propriety, and the consequences of offending powerful divine figures. The quirky tidbit: Hera's punishments often have ironic twists. For instance, she might cause a lover to transform into an animal, a plant, or another form entirely, turning personal vendettas into lasting, memorable spectacles. Imagine your spouse's jealousy creating cosmic-scale consequences. Hera does exactly that, with flair and precision. Historians still argue whether these narratives reflect genuine societal concerns about marital fidelity or whether they are dramatic exaggerations meant to entertain and teach moral lessons. Either interpretation emphasizes her enduring influence on relationships, gender dynamics, and domestic life in myth. You linger before a mural depicting Callisto transformed into a bear, her child Arcas unaware of the goddess orchestration. Every line, shadow, and gesture communicates the cruelty and inevitability of Hera's wrath, which acts both as punishment and moral instruction. Her anger is not impulsive, it is deliberate, affecting generations and creating stories that endure in culture and imagination. A humorous thought surfaces: Hera might have been the ultimate life coach for marital problems, though her methods are terrifyingly uncompromising. Subtle manipulations, long-term consequences, and theatrical transformations are all part of her program. Her wrath teaches lessons that mortals cannot ignore. Even minor figures in the mural's hunters, shepherds, or attendants reflect her influence, reacting with caution, fear, or reverence. Every glance, hesitation, and misstep carries consequences, illustrating the comprehensive reach of her anger. By the time you move toward the exit, you realize Hera's wrath is not just about vengeance, it is a continuous, intricate force shaping relationships, moral behavior, and narrative outcomes. Her influence lingers quietly yet powerfully, leaving mortals and heroes alike acutely aware that she watches, judges, and orchestrates with patience, precision, and purpose. You enter a chamber bathed in soft golden light, frescoes depicting divine rivalries and mortal endeavors along the walls. Hera's wrath here is a careful mix of subtlety and drama, influencing events through strategic interventions that shape heroism, morality, and the outcomes of seemingly ordinary decisions. The mainstream historical fact: Greek myths often portray gods as enforcers of ethical or social norms. Hera's interventions reflect cultural concerns about fidelity, justice, and respect, demonstrating that divine anger could serve both moral and narrative purposes. Her actions often reinforce societal expectations, providing cautionary examples for mortals and heroes alike. The quirky tidbit: sometimes Hera's wrath is theatrical for effect. In stories, she might create elaborate situations, sudden storms, confusing messages, or magical obstacles just to ensure maximum dramatic tension. Imagine a cosmic playwright, scripting every hesitation, misstep, and moment of irony. Hera's anger often reads like performance art in mythic terms. Historians still argue whether these interventions were genuinely believed to occur, or functioned primarily as narrative devices. Were mortals truly thought to be at the mercy of such cunning manipulations? Or did the tales serve to explore human character and divine morality? Either way, Hera's role is central to shaping stories and ethics alike. You linger before a mural showing a hero confronted by a sudden, unexpected challenge. The subtle cues, gestures, shadows, expressions reveal Hera's influence. The hero's path has been carefully redirected. Lessons embedded in struggle and adaptation. Her wrath is indirect but precise, compelling mortals to grow, endure, and sometimes fail under the weight of divine oversight. A wry thought crosses your mind. Hera would excel as a master strategist, creating challenges that are both instructive and inescapable. Her wrath is never arbitrary, it is carefully measured, orchestrated, and enduring, ensuring that consequences carry meaning and reinforce lessons about morality, resilience, and respect. Even minor figures in the murals, the villagers, attendants, and animals reflect her subtle influence. Every hesitation, glance, and reaction becomes part of the narrative of divine oversight, showing that no element of the mythic world escapes her reach. As you exit the chamber, the quiet, pervasive nature of Hera's wrath lingers. She is a master of patience, calculation, and narrative influence, shaping both mortal and divine actions in ways that are subtle, enduring, and unforgettable. You enter a serene, almost ethereal gallery where the frescoes depict divine counsel, moral lessons, and the consequences of human choices. Here, Hera's wrath is understated but omnipresent, a quiet force that shapes behavior, tests character, and underscores the persistent presence of divine oversight in mortal and heroic affairs. The mainstream historical fact in Greek culture, gods were believed to influence human life both directly and indirectly. Hera, as queen of Olympus and guardian of marriage, wielded her authority through careful orchestration, ensuring that actions, choices, and moral lapses had repercussions. Festivals and rituals reinforced this belief, reminding mortals of the constant need for vigilance and respect. The quirky tidbit, in some myths, Hera manipulates circumstances so that mortals inadvertently reveal their own flaws, or create their own obstacles. Imagine attending a dinner party where the hostess subtly engineers events to expose every faux pas. Hera's wrath is like that, subtle, precise, and deeply instructive. Historians still argue whether these indirect interventions reflect actual societal beliefs or narrative strategies designed to teach moral and ethical lessons. Either interpretation highlights the layered nature of her wrath. It is patient, pervasive, and psychologically sophisticated, affecting both direct actions and the ripple effects of human behavior. You linger before a mural depicting a mortal making a seemingly simple choice, unaware that Hera's subtle influence has guided the circumstances, so that the consequences are amplified. Each gesture, glance, and hesitation in the fresco is carefully orchestrated, demonstrating her ability to shape outcomes without overt displays of force. A thought crosses your mind with a wry smile. Hera could run a masterclass in behavioral psychology, guiding choices, influencing outcomes, and teaching lessons with impeccable subtlety. Her wrath is as much about shaping understanding and wisdom as it is about punishment. Even minor figures, servants, bystanders, and animals reflect the ripple effects of her strategic interventions. Their reactions, mistakes, and hesitations all illustrate the pervasive reach of her anger. Hera's wrath is an invisible hand, shaping lives, stories, and morals with patience, precision, and enduring influence. As you move toward the gallery's exit, you carry with you the sense that Hera's anger is not merely reactionary. It is a continuous, intricate force, shaping character, behavior, and narrative outcomes. Her subtle, omnipresent influence ensures that mortals and heroes remain forever aware of her watchful authority and enduring presence. The final chamber is vast and hushed, the frescoes blending twilight and candlelight, depicting climactic moments from the lives of mortals and gods alike. Here, Hera's wrath feels complete, a tapestry woven of jealousy, strategy, and relentless influence, touching every aspect of heroism, morality, and fate. You notice that even the smallest gestures carry the weight of her authority, and the air vibrates with the quiet echo of consequences that ripple across time. The mainstream historical fact: Greek myths consistently depict Hera as a goddess, whose anger is far-reaching and enduring. Her wrath shapes both mortal destinies and divine interactions, reinforcing social norms and ethical behavior while also providing narrative tension and dramatic intrigue. Festivals, rituals, and temples dedicated to her emphasize her pervasive influence and the importance of maintaining reverence and respect. The quirky tidbit in some tales: Hera's anger is almost theatrical, like setting up elaborate sequences of events that combine irony, misfortune, and moral lessons. For instance, she may engineer coincidences so perfectly that mortals unwittingly fulfill prophecies or stumble into predicaments she has quietly orchestrated. Imagine a cosmic playwright with an impeccable sense of timing and drama. Hera's wrath is equally meticulous and creative. Historians still argue whether these elaborate narratives reflect genuine beliefs about divine justice or primarily serve as storytelling devices. Either interpretation highlights the complexity of Hera's character. Her wrath is intelligent, far-reaching, and woven seamlessly into human and heroic experience. You linger before the grandest mural, depicting the culmination of multiple myths: heroes tested, mortals humbled, and gods maneuvering in delicate balance. Hera's presence is implicit in every outcome, subtle, patient, and unyielding. Her wrath is not always explosive. It is often a quiet, precise force, shaping events over years or generations, ensuring that actions, intentions, and moral choices resonate with consequence. A wry thought crosses your mind: Hera would excel as a master strategist or cosmic life coach, tracking actions, anticipating mistakes, and orchestrating challenges with perfect timing. Her anger functions as both instruction and narrative engine, subtly guiding, shaping, and sometimes correcting the course of mortal and divine life. Even the minor details, gestures, expressions, and background figures reflect her influence. The frescoes demonstrate that no one, not even the smallest participant, escapes the ripple effects of her wrath. Mortals, heroes, and gods alike are caught in her careful orchestration, and the impact lingers long after the moment passes. As you leave the chamber, the echoes of her influence stay with you. Hera's wrath is comprehensive, subtle, and enduring, a force that shapes morality, tests resilience, and crafts narrative threads across generations. In the mythic world, her anger is a quiet storm, ever-present, precise, and impossible to ignore, a testament to her unmatched authority and the delicate balance of divine power. You walk slowly down the final corridor, the frescoes fading into shadows, the torchlight softening to a gentle glow. The tales of Hera's wrath feel distant now, like ripples across a still lake, their echoes softening into the calm rhythm of your own breath. You notice the subtle interplay of light and shadow, the quiet spaces between images where stories pause and time seems to stretch, inviting reflection. Hera's anger, once vivid and overwhelming, now feels like a gentle reminder rather than a looming threat. The meticulous orchestration of events, the patience, the strategy, and the quiet persistence of consequence all transform in this moment into a lesson about care, attentiveness, and respect. Mortals, heroes, and gods alike are just navigating their paths, and her wrath, though ever-present, underscores the value of mindfulness and foresight. You feel your shoulders relax, imagining the gentle sway of the frescoes, the quiet patience of the goddess, and the continuity of stories that persist across generations. Even the smallest gestures, the subtle turns of fate, and the quiet orchestration of events create a sense of order and purpose, a cosmic pattern woven with care. The air grows still, the gallery empties in your mind's eye, leaving only the soft hum of imagination and memory. Hera's wrath is no longer a source of tension, but a lens through which the subtle beauty and complexity of Greek myth can be appreciated. You feel a sense of calm wash over you, the stories receding into quiet thought, leaving warmth, curiosity, and a lingering sense of wonder. Now, the world outside the myths feels softer, slower, and more expansive, as if the lessons of patience, strategy, and mindful observation have gently settled within you. Your mind drifts, carrying echoes of gods, mortals, and enduring tales into sleep, where stories, lessons, and dreams intertwine seamlessly.